25 forgotten TV dinners from the 1960s that filled every freezer. Remember when TV dinners meant more than just reheating leftovers? Back in 1960s, those aluminum trays were pure magic. Complete meals that let families eat while watching their favorite shows, no cooking required. Every freezer was packed with colorful boxes promising everything from fried chicken with cornbread to fancy gourmet meals that made you feel like you were dining out of home, until microwave technology and better frozen options made them vanish from grocery aisles. Let's take a trip back to the golden age of television and explore 25 forgotten TV dinners from the 1960s that filled every freezer. The Pioneers. Picture this. It's 1953, and a Swanson executive is staring at 260 tons of leftover Thanksgiving turkey. Most companies would see a disaster, but C.A. Swanson and Son saw opportunity. They grabbed some aluminum airline trays, divided them into compartments, and created what would become America's most revolutionary dinner innovation. But here's where it gets interesting. While Swanson invented the TV dinner in the early 50s, the 1960s were when these aluminum trays truly conquered American freezers. This decade belonged to three pioneering meals that changed how families ate forever, transforming dinner from a daily chore into an effortless routine. 1. Swanson Fried Chicken TV Dinner was the granddaddy of them all. Golden fried chicken pieces nestled next to whipped potatoes and mixed vegetables, all for just 98 cents. That crispy coating somehow stayed reasonably crunchy even after 35 minutes in the oven, defying all logic about reheated fried food. Kids across America fell in love with eating chicken off individual aluminum trays while watching their favorite shows, and parents marveled at how something so simple could make dinner time so peaceful. 2. Swanson Turkey TV Dinner emerged from that famous turkey surplus, featuring turkey slices with cornbread stuffing and sweet potatoes that, let's be honest, usually tasted like sweetened cardboard. But families didn't care because it felt like Thanksgiving dinner any night of the week. The psychological appeal was undeniable. Holiday comfort without the holiday work. 3. Morton's Chicken Pot Pie Dinner completed this pioneering trio by putting their famous pot pie right in the main compartment, surrounded by green beans and whipped potatoes. The crust never quite crisped up properly, often staying soggy despite the oven's best efforts. But something about individual pot pies felt incredibly special and grown-up. These three meals weren't just food, they were freedom. Freedom from hours of meal planning, shopping, cooking, and cleanup. They promised busy families that dinner could be sophisticated, convenient, and delicious, all at the same time. By 1965, those iconic aluminum trays had become as essential to American kitchens as refrigerators themselves. The comfort food champions. If the pioneers opened the door, these three TV dinners kicked it wide open and made themselves at home in America's hearts. Nothing said comfort food quite like the meals that try to capture mom's cooking in aluminum form, somehow managing to deliver emotional satisfaction even when the ingredients were questionable. 4. Banquet Salisbury steak was the absolute king of comfort food TV dinners. That mystery meat patty swimming in thick brown gravy, flanked by whipped potatoes and bright yellow corn. 6. Morton's beef pot pie rounded out this comfort food trinity with individual portions of their famous golden crust covering chunks of beef and vegetables in thick gravy. The filling always seemed to mysteriously disappear during cooking, leaving you with more pastry than pie. But eating individual pot pies while watching Bonanza felt quintessentially American. These three dinners tasted like childhood, like safety, like coming home after a long day. They proved that sometimes nostalgia tastes better than authenticity. International adventures. The 1960s were when TV dinners got adventurous, bringing exotic international flavors to suburban American freezers. These meals introduced families to cuisines they'd never heard of, even if the authenticity was questionable at best. For most Americans, these aluminum trays became their first passport to foreign flavors. 7. Chun King Sweet and Sour Pork was most Americans' first taste of Chinese food, opening a gateway to what felt like an entirely different world. The bright red sauce, mysterious pork chunks, and pineapple pieces over rice bore little resemblance to actual Chinese cuisine, but it felt incredibly sophisticated to suburban families who'd never ventured beyond European-American cooking. The fortune cookie tucked into the corner compartment was pure marketing genius. Families would fight over who got to crack it open and read the generic wisdom inside. The sweet tangy sauce became the flavor profile that defined Chinese food for an entire generation. 8. El Chorrito Mexican combination promised south-of-the-border excitement with rice, beans, and what the package claimed was seasoned beef. The heat level was carefully calibrated for the mildest palates, barely a whisper of spice that wouldn't offend sensitive tongues. But the bright yellow cheese sauce and crispy tortilla chips made it feel authentically Mexican to families who'd never crossed the border or even seen a real taco. The combination of textures and colors felt exotic and exciting, even if the flavors were toned down to Midwestern sensibilities. 9. Stouffer's beef stroganoff attempted European elegance with egg noodles, beef strips, and cream sauce that was supposed to evoke sophisticated continental dining. The packaging featured fancy script lettering that made it feel like fine dining, even if the sauce always seemed to separate during heating, creating an unappetizing, oily mess that bore little resemblance to the Russian classic. 10. La Choy Chicken Chow Mein completed the international experience with crispy noodles, chicken, and vegetables in brown sauce that somehow tasted both familiar and foreign. The texture was always a surprise, sometimes crunchy, sometimes soggy, never quite what you expected, but always intriguingly different from standard American fare. These international TV dinners were cultural ambassadors in aluminum trays, introducing Middle America to flavors beyond meat and potatoes. They opened minds and expanded palates in living rooms across the country. The seafood experiments. Seafood TV dinners were always a gamble. Fish and shellfish don't freeze and reheat as gracefully as beef or chicken, but that didn't stop companies from trying to bring the ocean to your freezer. These aquatic adventures represented some of the most ambitious and risky attempts in the TV dinner world. 11. Mrs. Paul's fish stick dinner was the safest bet in the seafood category, and probably the most successful. Those rectangular fish sticks, made from cod that had been processed, ground, and reformed beyond recognition, set alongside tartar sauce, French fries, and coleslaw in a combination that felt both familiar and slightly sophisticated. Kids loved them because they barely tasted like fish at all. The heavy breading and mild white fish created something that was more like chicken nuggets from the sea. Parents loved them because they felt like they were serving something healthy and educational, introducing their children to seafood in the least threatening way possible. The breading was always golden and crispy, masking whatever mysteries lay beneath in a coating of comfort. 12. Gorton's Fisherman's Platter was for the more adventurous seafood lovers who wanted to feel like they were dining at a New England fish house. This ambitious dinner featured fish sticks, fried shrimp, and fried clams all in one tray, with cocktail sauce and tartar sauce in tiny compartments that always seemed too small for the amount of food. The variety was impressive, giving diners a chance to sample different types of seafood in one convenient meal. The breading was consistently the best part, crispy, well-seasoned, and substantial enough to turn questionable seafood into something actually appetizing. 13. Swanson's fried shrimp dinner promised restaurant-style dining with breaded shrimp, French fries, and coleslaw. The shrimp were usually tiny and heavily breaded, but something about eating shrimp from a TV tray felt fancy and special, like you were dining at a seaside restaurant instead of your living room. The challenge with seafood TV dinners was texture. What emerged from the oven was often rubbery or mushy, bearing little resemblance to fresh seafood. But for inland families who rarely had access to fresh fish, these TV dinners offered a taste of coastal cuisine, even if it wasn't quite the real thing. Breakfast anytime. The 1960s brought us the revolutionary concept that breakfast foods could be dinner, and TV dinner companies were more than happy to blur those mealtime boundaries. These meals tapped into something deeply American, the idea that comfort food should be available whenever you wanted it, regardless of what the clock said. 14. Swanson's pancake and sausage breakfast turned morning comfort food into an evening meal that felt like a special treat every single time. 3 pancakes, 2 sausage links. 16. Banquet's French toast and sausage completed the breakfast for dinner trilogy with thick French toast sticks, breakfast sausage, and hash browns. The French toast was pre-dusted with powdered sugar, making it feel extra indulgent and dessert-like, while the hash browns provided that satisfying potato crunch that made the whole meal feel substantial and filling. These breakfast TV dinners tapped into something deeper than convenience. They represented comfort, nostalgia, and rebellion. There was something delightfully rule-breaking about eating pancakes at 6 p.m. while watching the evening news, something that made ordinary weeknight dinners feel special and unpredictable. The gourmet pretenders. Some TV dinner manufacturers had lofty ambitions, attempting to bring fine dining experiences to aluminum trays. These gourmet options promised restaurant-quality meals at home, though the results were decidedly mixed. They represented the TV dinner industry's attempt to move upmarket and prove that convenience food could be sophisticated. 17. Stouffer's beef bourguignon was perhaps the most ambitious attempt at sophistication ever attempted in the frozen food aisle. This French classic featured beef chunks in wine sauce with pearl onions and mushrooms, served over egg noodles that were supposed to evoke the bistros of Paris. The packaging screamed elegance with its fancy typography, continental flair, and promises of authentic French cuisine, though the wine sauce often tasted more like beef broth with red food coloring than anything that had ever seen a French kitchen. The beef was usually tender enough, having been braised before freezing, but the whole dish lacked the depth and richness that made the original so beloved. Still, serving beef bourguignon to your family felt incredibly worldly and sophisticated, even if it bore little resemblance to what Julia Child was teaching on television. 18. Swanson's chicken cordon bleu tried to capture the essence of this classic dish with chicken wrapped around ham and cheese, covered in a cream sauce that was supposed to evoke Swiss elegance. The execution was consistently challenging. The chicken was often dry from the freezing process. The ham filling was sparse and salty, and the Swiss cheese bore little resemblance to actual Swiss, often separating into an oily mess during reheating. But the name alone made families feel sophisticated and cultured, like they were dining at a fancy French restaurant instead of eating from aluminum trays in their living room. 19. Morton's veal parmesan promised Italian restaurant elegance with breaded veal cutlets covered in tomato sauce and mozzarella cheese, served with spaghetti that was supposed to transport you to Little Italy. The veal was usually tough and stringy, and the sauce was overly sweet with an artificial tomato flavor. But having veal on your dinner table felt incredibly upscale to suburban families who'd never ordered it at a restaurant. These gourmet TV dinners represented aspirational dining. They allowed families to feel cultured and sophisticated without leaving home or spending restaurant money. 21. Morton's mini hamburger platter brought the backyard barbecue indoors with tiny hamburger patties that looked exactly like miniature versions of real burgers, French fries, and baked beans. The hamburgers were more like seasoned meatballs than actual burgers, with a texture that was somewhere between a meatball and a slider. But something about eating mini burgers from a TV tray felt special and fun. The French fries were surprisingly good, somehow managing to crisp up nicely in the oven while maintaining fluffy interiors, and the baked beans added that sweet, smoky flavor that kids loved and parents tolerated. 22. Swanson's Pizza TV dinner was an ambitious attempt to capture America's growing pizza obsession in frozen form. The pizza was more like a small flatbread with tomato sauce and cheese, served with corn and a brownie for dessert. It bore little resemblance to actual pizza, but for kids who'd never had real pizza delivered, it was exotic and exciting. These kid-friendly TV dinners understood their audience perfectly. Children didn't care about authenticity or gourmet flavors. They wanted familiar tastes, fun presentation, and the special feeling of having their own individual meal. These dinners delivered on those simple but important requirements. The ambitious failures. Not every TV dinner was destined for success. These 3 ambitious attempts pushed the boundaries of what frozen convenience food could be, but ultimately proved that some culinary concepts just don't translate well to aluminum trays. They represented the industry's reach exceeding its grasp, Noble failures that taught important lessons about the limitations of 1960s frozen food technology. 23. Stouffer's Lobster Newbert was perhaps the most audacious TV dinner ever attempted, a frozen food moonshot that aimed for the stars and crashed spectacularly. Real lobster meat in a rich cream sauce over rice. This dinner promised fine dining elegance at TV dinner prices, targeting customers who wanted to feel sophisticated without leaving home. The reality was consistently disappointing. The lobster was often tough and fishy, having suffered terribly from the freezing process that destroyed its delicate texture. The cream sauce broke during reheating into an unappetizing, oily mess that separated into greasy puddles, and the whole thing felt like a pale, sad imitation of the restaurant dish it was trying to recreate. At nearly $3, it cost more than most families spent on an entire meal, making the disappointment even more acute when it failed to deliver on its promises. 24. Banquet Shrimp Scampi tried to capture the essence of this Italian-American favorite with shrimp in garlic butter sauce over linguine that was supposed to evoke romantic dinners at Italian restaurants. The fundamental problem was that shrimp becomes rubbery and tough when frozen and reheated, losing all the tender sweetness that makes fresh shrimp so appealing. The garlic butter turned into a greasy puddle that tasted more like artificial garlic powder than real aromatics, and the pasta was invariably overcooked and mushy by the time it reached your table. The dish looked beautiful on the packaging, with professional food photography that promised elegance and sophistication, but delivered nothing but disappointment and regret. 25. Morton's Chicken Kiev was the final ambitious failure in our collection, a Russian-inspired dish that featured chicken breast stuffed with herb butter, breaded and fried, served with rice pilaf and vegetables. The concept was sound, and the packaging promised authentic European elegance, but the execution was nearly impossible with 1960s frozen food technology. The butter leaked out during cooking, leaving behind dry, flavorless chicken, and the whole thing fell apart before you could take a proper bite. These failures taught the TV dinner industry important lessons about the limitations of frozen convenience food. Some dishes simply require fresh ingredients, careful timing, and skilled preparation that can't be replicated in a factory. These 25 forgotten TV dinners represented more than just food. They captured a unique moment in American culture when convenience was king and families gathered around television sets instead of dinner tables. Sure, the Salisbury steak was mysterious meat, and the international cuisines bore little resemblance to their authentic counterparts, but they delivered something precious, the promise that dinner could be effortless and still bring families together. By the 1970s, microwave technology and better frozen options would make these aluminum tray pioneers obsolete, but their legacy lives on in every convenience meal we heat up today. They taught us that sometimes good enough is perfect.